evening, Zimbabwe. Welcome to Live Talk. We are coming to you live from Studio 7 at the Voice of America in Washington. This Friday, September the 23rd, 2022. I am Tungamili Nkomo. Tonight, we bring you analysis of proceedings at the United Nations General Assembly, focusing mainly on calls by African leaders for the United States government and its Western allies to lift financial and travel sanctions that they imposed on ZANU-PF officials over alleged human rights violations. But President Emmerson Mnangagwa and his African peers, among them William Ruto of Kenya and Hage Geingob of Namibia, told the UN annual summit this week the so-called targeted measures are killing Zimbabwe's potential and affecting its people, adding the restrictions must be removed unconditionally. The United States has of course outlined the conditions that it says must be met before it removes the sanctions. But with the growing cacophony of African leaders fighting in Zimbabwe's corner, the question we are asking tonight is, can the US government finally oblige even without the reforms it has demanded? Lichona njani izulu kandaba siyahlangana kuhlelo lwe-Live Talk. Lamhlanje sihlaziya okwenzakale emhlanganweni we-United Nations General Assembly. Sikhangela ikakhulu amazwi kaMongameli Emmerson Mnangagwa awukuthi elemelika kumele lesule izijeziso elazethesa eleZimbabwe ngoba ziphazamisa umnotho kanti njalo zithwalise uzulu makhaza nzima. Abanye abakhokheli bamazwe ase-Afrika abagoqela oweKenya umnumzana William Ruto kanye lowaseNamibia umnumzana Hage Geingob labo batshele umhlangano we-United Nations kuliviki ukuthi izijeziso lezi kumele zesulwe. Umbuzo omkhulu esiwubuzayo namuhla ngothi njengoba abaholi base-Afrika bekhanya sebekhuluma ngazwi linye, singabona iMelika isusa izijeziso lezi na? Lanxa nje konke ethi kumele kulungisiswe kulokhe kungakagcwaliswa. iMelika ngokwazi kwethu ngokwazi kwabanengi yona ithi izijeziso lezi kaziqondiswanga kulizwe leZimbabwe njengelizwe as a whole kodwa ziqondiswe kumalunga eZANU-PF. Kwaziwa ivatereri nasi muchirongwa chenyu che-Live Talk tiri kuzeya zvaitika svondo rino kumsangano we-United Nations General Assembly ku New York muno mu America, apo mtungamiri weZimbabwe vaEmmerson Mnangagwa vakashora zvirango vanoti zvakatemerwa nyika yavo neAmerica. VaMnangagwa vanoti zvirango izvi zvinofanirwa kubviswa nekuti zviri kukanganisa ruzhinji rweZimbabwe. VaMnangagwa vakatsigirwawo nevamwe vatungamiri venyika dzemuAfrica vanosanganisira vaWilliam Ruto vekuKenya pamwe chete navaHage Geingob vekuNamibia. Asi America inoti zvirango izvi zvakaisirwa vakuru veZANU-PF chete uye hazvizi kukanganisa veruzhinji. Mubvunzo mukuru watiri kubvunza nhasi manheru ano ndewekuti sezvo vatungamiri veAfrica vachitaura neinzwi rimwe chete panyaya yezvirango iyi, tingaona here America ichizvibvisa? In his speech yesterday, President Mnangagwa touched on a gamut of issues, from touting that his government upholds human rights and democracy to demanding the lifting of these sanctions.
We are building our country brick by brick, stone upon stone, with the support of our friends and partners. As my government continues to entrench democracy, good governance and the rule of law, we are committed to vibrant, competitive, and peaceful political contestations. Notwithstanding our success, the ongoing deleterious effects of the illegal sanctions continue to hamper and slow down our progress and the realization of sustainable and inclusive development. Zimbabwe is a peace-loving country. We remain indebted to the SADC region and the African Union, as well as other progressive members in the Committee of Nations, for their unwavering support and calls for the removal of these unwarranted and unjustified sanctions on Zimbabwe. We once again call for their immediate and unconditional removal. My country welcomes the findings of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of the unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights who visited Zimbabwe in 2021. Mr. President, at the international level, Zimbabwe has adopted an engagement and re-engagement policy. The policy is underpinned by the principles of mutual understanding and respect, cooperation, partnership, and shared values with other members of the international community. We desire to be a friend to all and an enemy to none. My country is greatly concerned that more than 20 years after the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, hate crimes, xenophobia, racial discrimination, and intolerance have continued to increase at an alarming rate, including at international level.
Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa speaking there at the United Nations General Assembly yesterday before proceeding to Cuba for an official state visit today. Namibian President Hage Geingob, as said before, also condemned what he called unjust sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe and other countries, including Cuba.
Namibia pledges unwavering solidarity for nations that continue to bear the heavy burden of sanctions. Namibia reiterates its long-standing call for the lifting of the unjust embargo against Cuba. I met a 50-year-old young Cuban man who has not known anything but sanctions. Since he was born, it's a sanctions. How long are we going to continue with that? We are talking about building the peace in the world. But how can a country be sanctioned for such a long time? And children born don't know anything but sanctions. Please, it is time that sons and daughters of Cuba are given their right to a decent life, freedom, and embargo that denies them their right to develop their own country should be stopped now. Equally, we call on the lifting of sanctions against the Republic of Zimbabwe. Why are the sanctions in place for a country which is making progress at all levels? President Emmerson Mnangagwa and the people of Zimbabwe have made laudable progress and reforms. We should be given a chance to succeed without the weight of sanctions. Mr. President, the health of our planet is in serious jeopardy.
That was Namibian President Hage Geingob also speaking at the United Nations this week. And now for analysis, we turn to political commentator Dan Moyo, based here in the United States. Mr. Moyo, good evening and welcome to Live Talk.
Good evening, Mr. Nkomo, and thank you for having me.
So we are seeing African leaders, Mr. Moyo, increasingly banding together in calling for the lifting of these sanctions on ZANU-PF officials or Zimbabwe as a country, depending really on who you talk to. Do you see the U.S. government obliging, even without the reforms that is demanding being fulfilled by Harare?
No, I don't see how that can be done, because the U.S. has been very clear from the onset that Zimbabwe needs to meet certain standards that are the norm with other countries in the world. And Zimbabwe, for some reason, is failing to act on the requirements that the United States has put forward. So I look at this like when you are a guy and you are courting a girl, and the girl says, you know, I can date you if you stop smoking, but you continue smoking, and then you blame the girl for not dating you when she has told you that she can only date you if you stop smoking. This is the same thing with Zimbabwe. Right now, Job Sikala is languishing in jail for the past 3 months without bail on a political issue, and yet the Americans have told Zimbabweans that your human rights record is despicable. You need to improve on that. And yet we are seeing even those 13 people from Togazi who are locked up, we're seeing people being locked up. That means that political space, which is one of the fundamental things that the Americans are pointing to, we are seeing a violation, a gross violation of that by the Zimbabwean government, and yet they expect America to still lift sanctions, which, by the way, are sanctions that are imposed on individual ZANU-PF people that are deemed to be supporting the ZANU-PF government, which is oppressing its people.
But the government and ZANU-PF, Mr. Moyo, argue that these sanctions affect ordinary Zimbabweans, especially Zidera. They are saying Zidera has nothing to do with, targeting specific ZANU-PF measures, but it has everything to do about crippling the country's economy.
Yes, I agree that there are effects of these sanctions on the ordinary citizen. But let's understand here the broader picture. What the U.S. is saying is, hey, Zimbabwe, here's a list of things that we are saying, if you correct this, we will lift those sanctions. But Zimbabwe is refusing to do that. I have concluded that ZANU-PF is using the sanctions as a red herring so that they can continue looting resources in the country and then blame it on the sanctions. Because if they were really serious about these sanctions being lifted, then by now they would have implemented the reforms, the electoral reforms, the human rights violations. They would have corrected all those things. They are refusing because I think they know that once they abide by those requirements and the sanctions are lifted, then they will expose themselves to the world, because now they can no longer blame the sanctions for the failures, which we all know the economic failures in Zimbabwe are caused by corruption.
Siyabonga mnumzana Moyo, ngizaphenduka kuwe kodwa sizathatha ikhefu kancane. Uyatsho ukuthi iZimbabwe akulalutho esilwenzile kodwa uhulumende uthi kunengi la ubaba uMnangagwa ukhulumile emhlanganweni we-United Nations uthi ama-political reforms okhuluma ngawo, ama-electoral reforms okhuluma ngawo siyawa-implementa kade njalo uthi kulo mbuso wentando yeningi idemocracy ama-human rights amalungelo ayalondolozwa kade uthi le mithetho emibi efana labophosa labo ayiphase yesulwa kodwa qhubeka ubambile khonapho baba Moyo siza phenduka kuwe maduze nje. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back.
Every year, world leaders gather in New York for the annual United Nations General Assembly. Count on VOA to be there, delivering news you can trust on radio, TV, and the web.
Des discours présidentiels aux entretiens en tête-à-tête avec des responsables gouvernementaux de haut niveau, nous vous tiendrons informés des développements importants touchant le continent.
Líderes africanos vão abordar tópicos como alterações climáticas, o estado da economia, saúde, iniciativas juvenis e muito mais.
Usikose kufuatilia habari na vipindi maalum katika lugha 16 tofauti kuhusu kongamano la viongozi moja kwa moja kutoka makao makuu ya Umoja wa Mataifa mjini New York na Washington DC. Tutakuarifu kila tukio.
A free press is essential. VOA Africa.
Vachangoti bata tiri nepfenyiro ye Studio 7 abasanda kusixhuma singumsakazo we Studio 7 njalo sikuhlelo lwe Live Talk. Lamhlanje sixoxa ngomhlangano we United Nations lapho bekulo mongameli Emerson Mnangagwa oyethule amazwi izolo sithi isijeziso athi zafakelwa iZimbabwe yimelika kumele zesulwe. We are now joined by our second guest, a political commentator as well, and that's Professor Ricky Mukonza, all the way from South Africa. Professor Mukonza, good evening and welcome to Live Talk.
Good evening, Tunamili. Good evening to your listeners.
Thank you for joining us. Anzi nava Mnangagwa nevamwe vatungamiri venyika dzakasiyana-siyana muAfrica vachitara ku-United Nations. Hanzi zvirango zvakatemerwa zvavanoti zvakatemerwa nyika yeZimbabwe, and I'm saying that because we know kuti America iri kuti haiwa zvirango izvi zvakanangana nevanhu veZANU-PF chete. Saka hanzi nava Mnangagwa nevamwe vave kuAfrica ku-UN hanzi zvirango izvi ngazvibviswe nekuti zviri kuuraya vanhu veZimbabwe, ma-ordinary people, and hanzi ma-reforms ari kunzi aitwe hanzi nava Mnangagwa takamaita. Muri kuzvionawo sei?
Maita enyu vankomo, zvinokatyamadza kuti mutungamiri wenyika anoenda kunotaura nyaya yezvezvirango asi kumusha atasiya vasungwa vezvematongerwo enyika. Tikataurisa hedu nyaya yezvirango, inini maonero andinoita netsvakurudzo yandakamboita, vari kuti zvirango ngazvibviswe vanogona kunge vaine nyaya yakanaka, asi zvirango haisiriyo yega nyaya iri kunetsa muZimbabwe. Tine nyaya dzakawanda nyaya dzemafambisirwo anoitwa sarudzo, nyaya dzezvematongerwo enyika, nyaya dzemabatirwo anoitwa vanopikisa hurumende, nyaya dzekutambura, nyaya dzakawanda chaizvo, zvekuti kwandiri nyaya yezvirango haisiriyo nyaya hombe mukati meZimbabwe. Chandinoda kuti nditaure zvakare ndechekuti vatungamiri vemuAfrica vari kuti zvirango ngazvibviswe, vari kutaura zvakanaka, vari kuda kutsigirawo imwe nyika yavo iri muno Africa, asi matsigiriro avari kuita handisi kuti vanonyatsonzwisisa dambudziko reZimbabwe parinotanga nepariri neparinogumira. Handifunge kuti vatungamiri vemuAfrica vanosimbirira nyaya yemasanctions ava vane kunzwisisa kwakadzama pamusoro pedambudziko ranetsa muZimbabwe.
Thank you there, Professor Mukonza. Please do stay on the line. And of course, there is no Live Talk without listener contributions. Good evening, caller, and welcome to Live Talk. Hello, Mtereri Mlaleli.
Hello.
Yebo, makadi enyu.
Nikwedi makadi yo.
Aiwa, tiripo mati bata muri kupi?
Ndiri ku South Africa.
Ku South Africa, tipewo pfungwa dzenyu panyaya mudariro nhasi.
Hello.
Ndati tipewo pfungwa dzenyu nenyaya yemasanctions. Oh, I'm sorry, we've lost that caller there. Mpenduke kuwe baba moyo. Singakathathi ikhefu ubusakhuluma ngokuthi akulalutho solulungisiwe eZimbabwe kodwa umongameli Mnangagwa labanye bakhe kuhulumende kuZANU-PF ngitsho la abakhokheli bamazwe eAfrika abachiyeneyo bathi kunengi osokwenziwe eZimbabwe okufana lokwesula imithetho emibi efana labo POSA labo AIPA bathi umbuso wentando yeningi uyalondolozwa idemocracy kanti lamalungelo lawo ayahlonitshwa ama-political reforms kanye lama-electoral reforms okhulume ngawo bathi lawo ayenziwa uthini ngalokho?
Mr. Nkomo, ungathatha ingulube uyigcobisa lipstick still lokhu ingulube. So into ezenziwe ngabomnangagwa athi usezenzile yena kumele zifezeke ekuthuthukeni kwempilo zabantu ekhaya. Kumele zifezeke ekuthini akusela abantu ababoshelwa imibono yabo ehlukene nale ZANU-PF. Kumele zifezeke ekuthini thina sinje sise diaspora ilungelo lethu lokuvota kumele ngabe selilungisiwe manje. Uyafika u2023 asingeke sibe kwazi ukuvota. Yethi into yena uMnangagwa asithembisa yona. Mina wangithembisa face to face ngise New York ngikhuluma naye. Wathi 2023 moyo alizovota ngoba lami ngivumelana lawe ukuthi lilungelo leni lokuvota. So uyabona ke Mr. Nkomo, it's very easy for uMnangagwa ukwenza izithembiso lezi azenzayo. Kodwa it's very different from akuyikhona akwenzayo. So ma umlalela ekhuluma lapha e-United Nations, if ungumuntu ongaziyo ngeZimbabwe ongakaze afike eZimbabwe ongakaze axoxe labantu beZimbabwe, ungacabanga ukuthi iZimbabwe lilizwe elihle kabi elilomnotho abantu abaphila kamnandi. Kodwa ma usiya on the ground usiyakhangelisisa okwenzakalayo uthola i-opposite yalokho akukhulumayo uMnangagwa. So mina uMnangagwa ngibona engumuntu ofike lapho wama phambi kwabanye abakhokheli bemhlaba jikelele waqamba amanga ngento ezenzakala eZimbabwe ngoba konke lokho akukhulumayo izifiso zikaThemba lo amkela akukakenziwa konke lokho mhlawumbe engqondweni yakhe yena uzitshela ukuthi uyakwenza kodwa on the ground akubonakali konke lokho akukhulumayo.
Aha, thank you there Babu Moyo uqhubeka ubambile size Timbo yenda kunaba Mukonza. Professor Mukonza vanhu vakawanda vari kuchema zvikuru sei veku-opposition vari kuchema nenyaya yasikhala yanzi ari kushungurudza nevamwe vake vava ne3 months vakavharwa kuchikurubhi. Asi ZANU-PF nehurumende, just to play the devil's advocate, vari kuti haiwa nyika nenyika ine mitemo yayo kana munhu akatyora mitemo anofanirwa kusungwa. Uyezve nyaya yapasikhala hanzi hainei nezvematongero enyika munhu aka-incita violence saka hanzi neZANU-PF ngaanangane nemutemo hapana zvekupindira zvekuti ari kushungurudzwa nekuti ndewe-CCC.
Uko ndo kwainzi nevakuru kupota nemumwe kuri kuitwa neZANU-PF nekuti tese tinoziva chikonzero chakaita kuti vasikala nevamwe wavo vange vari mujeri. Munoziva Vangomo, iko kunyepa ikoko ndo kwatisvitsa senyika patiri nhasi nekuti tinozvinyepera dzimwe nguva nezvunhu zvinogumisira zvatikanganisa isusu tiri kufunga kuti takangwara vacho. Ngatitorei nyaya vari kutaura kuti nyika imwe neimwe ine mutemo. Ikodzero yemunhu kuti kana ari kupomerwa mhosva atorwa aendeswa abatwa kana akakumbira bheo ikodzero yake kuti apuhwe bheo. Asi tinoona kuti vasikala nevamwe wavo vari kunyimwa bheo nguva nenguva. Tobva tatarisazve vamwe vanenge vapara mhosva asi vachitsigira ZANU-PF vakaita savana wadye jena. Vanongosungwa nemapurisa voendeswa kumatare vobva vapuhwa bheo. Asi tikatarisa mhosva dzavo, mhosva yavo inogona kunge yakatokura kudarika yavasikala. Ndosaka ndiri kuti zviri kuitwa neZANU-PF handizvi kuti vari kufunga kuti vakangwarira ani, asi zvavari kuita hazvina wazvinobatsira, nekuti vanhu vese vari kuona, America iri kuona, nyika dzese dziri kuona kuti pano vanhu ava vari kungonyepa. Ndo maonero andinoita nyaya iyi, Vankomo.
Tinotenda Professor Mukonza and Regai Timbo tora mutereri ku South Africa. Wakadi ako mutereri?
Zvikwedu makadiwo.
Aiwa, tinofara kana muchifara wo nguva dzati kana tipewo pfungwa dzenyu. Halo mutereri, tipewo pfungwa dzenyu mapinda muchirongwa. I think we are experiencing connection issues again with that caller. But for those who have just joined us, we are streaming this conversation on our Facebook pages, VOA Shona, VOA Studio 7, and VOA Ndebele. We are also live on YouTube at VOA Zimbabwe. As we wrap up our show, mpenduke kuwe pabumoyo ngoDisemba ngoMpalakazi, umongameli Joe Biden uzakwenza umhlangano labakhokheli beAfrika abachiyeneyo. Umnanga kwakanxuswanga kodwa uzamelwa nguShaba, uForeign Affairs Minister. Ubona ile Zimbabwe litholani kulomhlangano ngamafitshane?
Well, Zimbabwe, really the ball is in their court. Ibhora lisesigabeni sabo. Yibo kumele ba-acte, yibo kumele bakhombise ukubana balesifiso sokuthi balungise izinto ezirongo lapho. Izakhamizi zeZimbabwe ziyacomplaina, udubo lukhona every day, and bayabona ukuthi i-government on the other hand, abantu be-government bayanotha besiya phambili, bakha izindlu ezamamiliyoni, bahamba ngezimota ezidurayo. But the masses on the ground bayahlupheka every day, akula misebenzi, akula ma-opportunities. So umnangagwa lokuthi uyabe siyadingana kuma-meetings lawo, I don't know, ngoba clearly akalakho angafika ukuthi hayi thina sesenze lokhu lalokhu. Uzamile ukukhuluma ngezinto ezifana nokuthi sakha amadamu lani. Well, maybe ngizinto ezikuma-plans, ngoba sihlala simuzwe ngumuntu okhuluma ngama-infrastructure, sesitshaya idili le-China, sesitshaya idili le-Belarus, kodwa amadili akhona abonakali on the ground.
And we must say that tonight we deliberately ignored politicians just to do analysis on this matter. Ukhuluma lama politicians at times, you know, iviki yonke besikhuluma le-CCC, ZANU-PF, CCC, ZANU-PF, abayibo abahamba phambili. Kodwa lamhla sithe sixoxe lama-analysts abahlaziya ezombusazwe. Tichivhara chirongwa Professor Mukonza Pachidimbu. Msangano we-US Africa nevatungamiri veAfrica uchaitwa navaBiden muna December. Muri kuona uchibatsira Zimbabwe sei? 30 seconds. Of course, Mnangagwa will not come, but pachauya vaShava, Foreign Affairs Minister.
Musangano uyu hongu uchauya, asi handione zvauchabatsira Zimbabwe. Nekuti hapana chandinotarisira kuti chinge chashanduka kusvika muna December. Saka muchidimbu musangano uyu uchangouyawo semimwe misangano yakamboitwa kumashure uko, asi hapana chauchabatsira Zimbabwe.
And that brings us to the end of our show. Would like to say thank you so very much to our guests. That's Ricky Mukonza, Professor Ricky Mukonza, as well as Mr. Dan Moyo. Thanks also to our listeners and viewers. Be sure to tune in again next week. But remember, our regular radio shows are on 7 days a week. I am Tungamili Nkomo in Washington. Good night, Zimbabwe.